Hello and welcome to the CFB Super Show. A little intro clip there for you guys, get you in the mood. My name is Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuce 85, joined by my guy Jake Kucheck today. We have a large slate tomorrow. We have a lot to talk about. We're going to go game by game as always, talk about prize picks, give you guys cores. So I know last night or 2 nights ago show lasted a long time, so we'll try to see if we can go a little quicker for you guys, streamline that. I see there's some live viewers, which I appreciate. If you guys are watching, please hit that like button, get our stuff seen more in the YouTube algorithm. A lot to talk about, as I said. Today's slate was we were pretty confident, but we knew we had to do some dumpster diving, and as dumpster diving happens, it didn't quite work out, and Deuce Vaughn didn't get the score we needed, but he was a lot less owned than I thought he would be. So I still feel pretty good about that play. Jake, how did you do today on the slate? I know you said before the show you didn't play a lot, but it sounds like you did play a little. So how'd you do?
Yeah, it was light volume, but did still get some action, and it was one of those slates where you did okay, and you're happy to come away with a positive on the ledger, but didn't crush. But when you do that, it gets you that much more excited for the next slate, which happens to be the very next day. So we're pumped about that.
For sure. Yeah. So we're going to see what we can find for you guys in terms of, maybe some sneaks. We'll talk about some chalk. There's already ownership projections out, so we will talk about those as well. If you guys have questions and you're watching live, I have the chat pulled up, so we'll answer those in real time for you as they come in. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and jump right into the slate here and talk about the first game, and it's going to jump around a little bit from the DraftKings listing here. First game, though, Florida State versus Florida. We have Florida -3, 59 over-under, pretty decent. There's a lot of high-scoring games on this slate, but keep in mind there were some on today's and they didn't work out. So definitely some good spots to target with this one as well. There was some talk about the starting quarterbacks for Florida, being Richardson, maybe Emory Jones, but it sounds like it's definitely Richardson now. So tell us a little bit about the Florida battle going on here and if you like anybody in this game.
Yeah, so I mean, we do want to get as much of a confirmation as possible that it's going to be Richardson. It definitely seems to be trending that way. I would love to see something like Richardson warming up with the first team, prior to lock, so we can get that for sure. They're priced similarly, so it's not too much of a big deal if you have to flip that at the last minute. But given their relative skill sets, I would rather play Richardson in that spot. Because of his skill set and because he's obviously very dangerous on the ground with his legs. That tends to take away from the running backs a little bit. Florida running backs don't tend to get a lot of volume anyway. And so I'm certainly not going up to Pierce at 6K. You need a lot more volume than he would typically get. Malik Davis and Naquan Wright are both worth a shout as just extreme punts, because I do like this game environment a lot, and they're the kind of guys that could break one, but they're going to need to get like a 380 in one line to do any damage. They're not going to get a whole lot more volume than that. They just kind of split touches in that backfield, and a lot of them go to the QB spot as well. As far as the receivers go, it's somewhat of a similar story with the target share being spread out to the point that it's hard to consistently rely on any of these guys. We can go with what's recent, and that's Copeland at 6,100 and Shorter to a lesser degree at 5K. Anything else below that, you're kind of just spinning the roulette wheel, hoping you land on the right one that happens to spike and get volume or break a long one or two in that particular game. But like I said, there's going to be points. It does seem like it's a competitive environment, rivalry game. Obviously, teams should be motivated. New coach, never know what that's going to do to the offense. I don't know that the offense was necessarily even the problem for this team. It seems like they had more defensive breakdowns, but we'll see we'll see how that offense looks. I wouldn't go too nuts here, but I do want to have, a piece or two of this game. Just because I do think there'll be points on the other side, the Florida State side. I do kind of like Travis. That the 6,900 price has kind of been in that mid to high 6 range for a while now. Another QB that is able to get it done on the ground, and we do like that. Maybe I would want to see him a little bit cheaper. I'd like, I would have loved to see him in like the high 5s, low 6s. I think he was at that price earlier in the year when they're kind of splitting that. But this isn't too much to pay for a quarterback that has the mobility. Corbin in the running game, I never seem to get there with him. It always seems like the price is pretty fair on Corbin, and they too kind of split the running back carries, especially now with Toafili being back and being kind of a goal line threat. I'm probably not super interested in Corbin, but if you're game stacking it, I get the play. Ward just not seeing the volume as much as I would like to see him become a thing. At a certain point, we have to cut bait from expectations like that. And similar deal with Toafili. I mean, yeah, he's 3,100. And he was actually more productive than Ward was against Boston College because he got in the end zone. But you're looking for a pretty thin play to work out going down that far. And then in the passing game, kind of a similar deal. These teams are actually fairly mirror image of each other from personnel grouping standpoints and how the DK prices worked out. But Wilson had the most volume, if you call it that. I think he had like 4 catches against Boston College for 60, 65 yards, something like that. And my man Ja'Kai Douglas got the volume again. Only got 40 yards out of it this time, but the volume was there. So if you're looking for a cheap receiver as a piece of this game, that's where I would probably land on the Florida State side. But just know that you're buying for what could potentially be an extreme value if they break along play. You're not necessarily buying a lot of target share and PPR volume type of plays.
For sure. Yeah, I think Richardson falls in that category for me. There's like 3-4 guys at quarterback that are in that like 6K, 7K range that I really like, and he's definitely a guy that I think I'm considering pretty heavily on the Florida side. And they just got rid of Mullins, so sometimes teams play inspired after that for the new guy or the interim guy, so it'll be interesting to see. All right, Wake Forest versus Boston College. We have Wake Forest -5, 64 over under, so pretty high total there. I think that it looks like it's the highest total on the slate, typical for Wake Forest games. On the Wake side, Sam Hartman at 9.3, he's always in play. I think for me, strategy talk wise, I don't feel like I'm going to be paying up for the Strouds, the Hartmans of the world. I usually don't. And it worked pretty well for me. And I usually pay up at running back, and it didn't work out as well today. But I think that on this particular slate, we can get away with going cheaper. So Hartman's always that GPP guy. He's going to throw the ball, a ton. He's, hasn't been under 43 pass attempts in the last 3 games. He's typically going to hover around that 37 to 40 range. Going up against BC, their offense with the jerk store is just good enough to where, they'll keep scoring as well. And their defense is just good enough to where it'll keep Hartman from scoring, I think, 6 touchdowns, in one of those crazy games. So that'll keep him, in the game. And that 9.3 price point for GPP is definitely solid. Where I would potentially look here, though, would be the running backs just because of their, price-wise. CBS, Christian Smith missed last week, and then suddenly Justice Ellison missed last week. So those two are both, seem pretty highly questionable. I was digging around on some message boards. Doesn't seem to be a lot out there on those two just yet. If they were to be out, though, Christian Turner is only 3.9, and then kind of I don't want to say out of nowhere, but their RB4, Quentin Cooley, obviously stepped up as 3K, and he played a lot more than I thought. I thought Turner, we kind of toyed with the idea of, Turner's going to get all this volume. It was still Clemson, so we didn't. he had 6 carries for 19 yards. He did score, but then Cooley had 8 carries for 39 yards and a touchdown, and he outsnapped him by 11 snaps to 10. So not a big deal there, but they're definitely in what would be probably a timeshare, which is kind of the Wake Forest MO anyways. I mean, Hartman's going to steal carries from these guys, goal line touches as well. So it's not like they're slam dunk plays, but if they were out and against BC, whose defense is adequate, but they're not Clemson level, I think, a min-price Cooley, if he's going to get 10-ish touches, I think that's okay. I don't know that we'll need to go there, but it's definitely an option. And then as far as wide receivers go, Roberson, you got A.T. Perry, 7, 8, 8K. They're pretty much matchup proof. They're probably going to break 100 and a touchdown at minimum. They usually do. But it's going to be hard to get there because we have all these other options. We're going to talk about the Dotson, David Bell. I'm a big Keaton Thompson guy. I'm going to be, I know that's the game that you're going to talk about, but I'm going to be harping on him as well. So it's really hard to look at the range and say, yeah, Roberson against BC, I'm definitely going to take that. And he might outscore those guys, but I'm not as confident in him as I am a guy like David Bell, who's always going to get that PPR work, or Jahan Dotson, who is going to face the Sparty, secondary. So it's really hard to get to any of those guys. I really would just be looking at the Wake Forest running backs. And it's weird to say because it's a high over under total, and there's going to be a lot of points like Wake Forest games are. Phil Jerkovich, his price is 7.8. He's still in play, but it's not that egregious 4 or 5 price that it was last week.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, he started off pretty rough. People were starting to panic, but it was like, I never really got freaked out about it because he didn't have to do a whole lot. And then, he rushed for a touchdown and suddenly we were okay. 20 fantasy points. So he's definitely in play. Wake Forest is a team that's pretty bad against the run. Their defense is kind of weak in general. They give up a lot of points. So I could see Jerkovich actually rushing for like 80, maybe even 90 yards and a touchdown and stealing a little from the running back I'm about to talk about in a second. So he's definitely in play. He's probably more of a GPP guy, but he's definitely in play. Definitely like Pat Garwo at 6'1". I think he's probably going to be pretty popular. Pulling up some early projections, he's like in the low 20 to 22 range. So that's pretty high for a 13-game slate. Expect to see a lot of him in cash as well. And I mean, just looking at the matchup against Wake Forest, we saw last week with Clemson, Shipley went over 100 and a couple scores. And there's a team they ran for almost 300, I think it was. So just the fact that Wake has consistently been giving up a lot of run yardage, 214.2 per game. This has to put Garwo in the play. Even with Jerkovich potentially stealing, he's still going to get his 20-ish carries, which has been pretty consistent. Even with Phil back, he's actually looked better with Phil because they have a quarterback who can throw. With Grosselo's never really a threat to throw downfield, so they could load up and stack the box. Opposing defense is good. With Phil, you got to respect the pass, which only helps Garwo in this situation. So he's also only 20 yards away from a 1,000-yard season, so expect him to get the rock early and often. That is RB1 material here with Garwo, and somebody that I'm going to be working in my lineups quite a bit. At 6'1", especially the price point of like 5.5 to 7K today is chock full of QBs and running backs that we're going to talk about. And then as far as wide receivers go, Zay Flowers, again, he's 6'9". He's a good GPP guy. He's up there with Roberson. I mean, he ended up catching a touchdown last week after it looked like he was going to bust, 392-1. So he still did okay. But again, we have, Thompson, Bell, Dotson, all these guys, Ohio State receivers who have a tough matchup, but they're still always in play. So it's really difficult for me to say, yeah, Zay Flowers is going to be that guy. With that being said, if you're one of those MME folks that are looking for, 15 to 20 different lineups and you want to expand your player pool, a Phil Flowers, stack against Wake in the highest total is definitely going to be in play. Typically, we see these high totals get a lot of ownership, but that's just not going to happen in this game because of all the other, price points on guys, the matchups, and better names. This is just going to get ignored. If this would have been the highest total in the slate and it was like, Ohio State and Wake Forest, then yeah, you'd be talking about some major crazy ownership. But that's pretty much it. If you want to go to the Wake Forest running backs, we'll wait for injury news and see. I'm not really that worried about them. And then as far as BC goes, I'm on the Garwo train. Right now, it looks like he's top 3 in ownership for running back. So that's going to be one of those cash game plays. I think you just play him and you get your 100 and a touchdown, and whatever he gives you above that, you're feeling pretty good. So it's kind of weird, right? Like you have a high total game like that, and it's just like you're kind of meh about everyone.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's just if I can
Yeah, go for it.
comment on that briefly. Like usually that's what I gravitate to. Not just a high total, but like a pretty close spread too. Like it's within a touchdown. So you would think like, man, I want to jam in everybody from that. But then you look a little closer and it's like, well, the pieces aren't really there. Like if you want to go to Garwo, I think Garwo is probably the strongest play from this game, and like that. Running backs against Wake Forest and TCU have worked out pretty well, but there's not a lot on either side that I would want to pile on top of that, and that's rare for such what is theoretically such a good game environment.
For sure. All right, moving to the next game, Georgia versus Georgia Tech. DK does have a money line for it, so it's minus 35. Big old blowout in store here. 54.5 over under. Georgia Tech, well, I guess I should just say me. I think you did too, not necessarily last week, but over the season, we've been Jahmyr Gibbs fans. I recommend him as like a GPP. If you're looking for an alt guy, certainly not cash. And Notre Dame stepped up and shut him down. This would not be a spot for to even throw one lineup at him because Tech typically don't target against Georgia. It doesn't look like a good spot here. And with Georgia minus 35, we're going to see, probably some random touchdowns on the Georgia side. So is there anyone here we could really look at for our lineups?
Yeah. So on that subject of random touchdowns, there is a guy at 3K that got cleared to return to being on the field, which is George Pickens, and I'm a George Pickens truther from a couple years ago, and he's had his ups and downs with that program certainly, and coming off of injury, just in time for conference championships and bowl season this year. Obviously, when he's healthy, he's a phenomenal talent, and they probably won't give him a ton of snaps, but he's the kind of player that needs maybe 15 snaps and 8 routes to go for 3 and 150 and 2. So not a lot of folks with that kind of talent at 3K. And so if you're looking for a complete GPP flyer from this game, that's where I would go. I'm not getting into paying for running backs that get 8 to 10 carries and share all kinds of other touches, and I'm not paying up for tight ends, and I think I'll go Stetson Bennett's entire college career without playing Stetson Bennett in DFS. So yeah, if you want a shout at 3K Stoneman, George Pickens is your guy. That said, make sure he's playing. But if he is, he can be dangerous. Other than that, we could probably move to the next game.
Which is Texas Tech versus Baylor. I have them as 14-point favorites. Speaking of Baylor, over under a 52. Now, I did read a little something prior to going on, and then it was confirmed by our resident Baylor expert and super fan in chat, Faked. I think that's how you say it. That Jerry Bohannon is likely not going to play. It's questionable day to day, whatever you want to say, but they don't really need to play him. They can save him if they want. So it sounds like Blake Shapen, I think is how you say that, is going to get the start. We saw him come in against Kansas State, and he actually looked okay. He rushed for 44 yards, threw for 137, no touchdowns, but he had a nice little 32-yard pass that had some nice zip on it. So, they have someone adequate that can throw the ball. They're facing off at Texas Tech. It's really the reason I'm kind of talking about Shapen even is because the running game should be, in a really good spot here. And I think this is another group that's going to go overlooked by the masses. Myself included, my first run on my main didn't include it, but I really maybe backtrack and look here. Of course, we got Abram Smith, 7'2". That's kind of his price, that 6'8" to 7'2" range. The battering ram, and then you've got the elusive Treston Ebner there, who's only 4'4". We should probably get a real big heavy dose of both without Bohannon playing, and Shapen just not going to ask him to put the game on his shoulders. It's Texas Tech. Let's get the dub. Let's not do anything crazy. Let's just run, and they should be able to do that. Texas Tech's given up 32.5 points to their opponents. Rushing wise, it's about 143. It's not a huge number, but they have given up some big games to elite running backs in the past. So that's definitely on the table here. I just like Smith as somebody who's going to probably get 25 carries. I know he's been hovering around that low 20 range. We saw against BYU in a close game a while back. He had 27. So it does show that they are willing to give him that type of carries. But Ebner has been, kind of solid like 10, 11, 12, 13 carries. So he's going to still cut into his time there. And he has a threat to get, touchdowns from him. So that is the main reason I would maybe stray from Abram Smith. But circling back around, he's not really a good GPP play for that reason either, whereas he'll probably rush for like 125 to 130, which would be fine in cash, but not score the touchdown, which you're really going to need in those GPPs, whereas Ebner might be your GPP guy. Looking at it, Abrams played 240 snaps, Ebner 177. He's out-carried him 186 to 127, but still on the field for a significant amount. Smith does have 11 touchdowns, so he has that equity. It just seems recently, maybe the last 2 or 3, that Ebner's been the one kind of poaching the touchdowns. So it might be kind of recency bias. I haven't pulled up the logs to confirm that, but I do watch a lot of Baylor games, oddly enough, and it just seems like that happens a lot. As far as the receivers go, for Baylor, like I said, it's a good matchup. Texas Tech, they're giving up almost 270 yards through the air per game, so quarterbacks really can crush them. So, I mean, if they did want to come in here and start throwing around, he could probably do it. Kind of makes, a guy like RJ Sneed interesting at 4 or 5, but I have had zero luck with wide receivers from Baylor. That, Tyquan Thornton had a couple of ham games. I missed out on those, and his price went up at that point, and I didn't chase it. I did try Sneed early in the year because Sneed was a guy that a lot of us, myself included, thought he was going to have maybe a semi-breakout year. He showed flashes last year or over the course of his career, and it just hasn't happened. And then, I've done the Estrada Sims thing when I needed value. So nobody on this Baylor side besides the running backs that really excite me. If we didn't have these cheap Aidan O'Connells and Spartan secondary on the slate with a really cheap Clifford, I might be talking more about a 6'8" Chapin, but there's just a really concentrated group of players that I'm looking at here, and I don't want to stray too far away from that. As far as Texas Tech goes, man, they ran into a buzzsaw of a defense, which Oklahoma State defense is pretty elite at this point anyways, maybe not truly elite, but they can shut someone down, and Texas Tech had a really tough time moving the ball, couldn't score points. Donovan Smith got some ownership last week after what he did to Iowa State, so I get it. He's only in the low to mid 5K range, but if he's not running, it's going to be tough. I don't see him being like that 300-yard passer like he was against the Cyclones. I think that was more of an outlier than anything. So he's there if you want to go that route. I do. I bat an eye when I look and see Sir Roderick Thompson at 4.9. In years past, if I thought that I would get him in, the year 2021 at that price and not be that interested, I might, ask you how much you've had to drink that day, because there was a time when Thompson was a top 10 type of running back in DFS and we were using him a lot. So it's really quite odd to look at that price and just say, I'm not really interested. Unfortunately, the quarterback play has been so poor across the board that they haven't been able to get anything going in the running. The blocking's been poor. So wide receiver wise, same kind of thing. As I always get asked about him, and I hear talking in the industry, people, Eric Ezekama is a good player, and it's always so cheap, and we want to use him, and he has this upside, and we've seen these 100-yard games. But again, the QB play is just absolutely murdering him. I've been kind of a fan of Kalen Geiger in the past, but he doesn't get the volume. They use him in the running game sometimes, but there's just nothing here weapons-wise that is sexy for Texas Tech, and I think they're ready to just close the book on this season, much like my damn Huskies, who lost the Apple Cup in Seattle for the first time since 2007. That was a brutal one to watch. But just kind of ready to close the book on this one and move on to next season. So they're probably going to get smacked around by Baylor. It might not be a blowout, but I think Baylor's just going to ball control and run it down their throats over and over again, which is why I like the running backs. But I don't know if they're going to make my lineup. So another game where I'm not really sure. Do you see Ebner as maybe being like a main team guy at 4-4? It's kind of cheap.
Not really. It seems like a spot where it'd be really easy to get that wrong. In terms of who you go with. And so I think, anytime it's that large of a spread, if you think that they're going to turn things over to the backup running back and that guy's going to get, 20 carries in the second half, then something crazy will happen, and there will be like 3 block punts for touchdowns, and it ends up being a competitive game. And then if you go with the big guy that you're paying more for, it kind of seems like, well, then every time they get down inside the 5, they give it to the backup running back. So it's just one of those spots that I've seen burn me too often, that I want to get more reliable touches from anybody I put in that RB slot, and ordinarily with Baylor, I would say this is a pretty good spot for that, but it hasn't been the case lately, so I don't think I can get there either.
Yeah. And we've had some pretty good luck with running backs, but lately we've been taking chance. We've been playing the Dom Johnsons who wrecked us today. We tried, this Kavasi Smoke a few weeks ago in one of those secondary slates. So you and I, we've tried some exotic things, and yeah, I think we're just ready to get back to playing these bell cows when possible, and not worrying about getting pilfered as much. All right, so next game, and this is going to be one that people, I'm definitely be watching it. I'm excited for this game. Ohio State versus Michigan, over under of 65, very high for a Michigan game. 7.5 point favorites on DK. Last check, that was a couple hours ago. So pretty close game. I guess it's just really, do you believe if Ohio State's going to impose their will on offense, or if Harbaugh is going to finally solve the Buckeye puzzle and slow them down? So what are we doing here? It's going to be a great game, but is it DFS viable or what?
Yeah. So as a full disclosure, Buckeye fan. So I certainly don't think that Harbaugh is going to solve the Buckeyes this season or any season, and probably be his downfall at some point. But from a DFS perspective, it's interesting to see the receivers finally priced up. Like, this is, I don't know if it's the most concentrated team in all of college football, but if it's not, it's close, right? There's 3 receivers that matter ever. They're all incredibly talented. And any of them could spike on any given week. Multiple of them could spike on any given week. Against Michigan State, all 3 of them will spike. So it just, so much talent in one position group, that if I'm Jim Harbaugh, I'm spending all week preparing for how I'm going to slow down, at least 2, if not all 3 of those receivers. And what that means, if I'm Ryan Day, is that I know that Jim Harbaugh hasn't been preparing for Travion Henderson. And so I think the first time we did the show, it was for me, it was going to be a big Travion Henderson week. I like the way that things lined up for him. I like that again this week. And I think that, it's not going to be a scenario where it gets turned over to a backup. I do think this game stays marginally competitive, and this is the most competitive game for both schools. Any rivalry game typically is. But I think that in games like that, Ryan Day's had a tendency to lean on the ground game a bit. And I think that the passing game has been on display so much recently that there will be some recency bias to kind of, shading coverage over the top or not having as many guys in the box. And that's just going to be lethal against an Ohio State rushing attack that's been as effective as they have. So yes, I will never talk you off of going away or going with any of the 3 receivers. It's probably not the week for Stroud. I'm probably not, paying up that high for Stroud. Even though, 304 is certainly within the realm of possibility. Like, that's not even a great game for paying that much for the opportunity cost of what that, is keeping you from getting to elsewhere. And Henderson, on the other hand, I think pretty good shot at the best running back day on the slate. I'm not going to say it's 204 touchdowns the way I did the other week, but I think he's gonna have involvement in the passing game because they are going to be, guarding over the top so much. He's going to have an opportunity on some short passes, screens, as well as getting, probably 18 to 20 carries that are design runs for him. And we've seen what he can do when he gets that kind of volume. So I'm gonna say I'm more on the Henderson side. Obviously, in GPP, all those receivers are viable, but I'm leaning more towards the running game. On the Michigan side, I can't recommend a Michigan quarterback. I'd like to see Harbaugh coach someone up that's able to keep pace with an offense like this. It's probably not McNamara. I don't think that the talent's there, and the only DFS worthy game he's had has been against Michigan State, and everybody has a good game against Michigan State. So probably not going there. I do have probably some interest in Haskins, and I don't know what the status of Corum is or will be or won't be, but Haskins is pretty clearly the guy. They kind of backed off of using him when they got up big last week, and so that indicated to me that he's probably going to be heavily featured this week, and Harbaugh knows as well as we do that the passing attack isn't going to do the job against Ohio State. So he's going to want to control the ball. He's always been that kind of coach. And so Haskins is going to get a lot of volume. It's just a question of how efficient he'll be. I think he has a decent opportunity to have a pretty good game here, but the price difference, Haskins at 7,900, Henderson at 8,200. I'm probably going to lean Henderson more often than not. If you want to get nuts and use both in GPP in particular, I actually wouldn't talk you off that either. I think both teams are going to want to pound the rock, and they're both going to have opportunities to score touchdowns as well. So that's where my focus is. A couple shouts on the Michigan side. I'm not super interested in the quarterback, but Andrew Anthony had that huge breakout game against Michigan State and hasn't done a whole lot since. I think he got banged up a little bit. Should be good to go in this one, but at 3,400 as a run back for Henderson, you could do worse than that. And then Eric All has seemed to get a lot of volume lately, and he's at 3,800. So don't have to pay up a ton for your run backs if you're using Henderson or anybody else on the Ohio State side. So if you want to have that kind of correlation in there, it's viable to do so without breaking the bank on both sides of it, and that's always something I like to do. So yes, this isn't necessarily a smash DFS game where I'm trying to jam in everybody, but I do think if you pick your spots, there's a lot that you can get from this game and that is viable.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I mean, Corum probably won't play, but if he were to get ruled in or whatever at 4-4, I probably still wouldn't be brave enough to play him in my main. But I mean, knowing how explosive Corum is, I would have to get some exposure there. He's a pretty decent pass catcher too. It's a little bewildering to see him that cheap, knowing that he's hurt or whatever. But and then I like the call on receivers on the Michigan side, Eric All especially as like tight end or shorter routes. I feel like he could possibly rack up some PPR points with Ohio State kind of keeping things in front of them. So I definitely like that call. All right, next game is Maryland versus Rutgers. 53 over under. Maryland, I have them as -1.5. There's some as far as ownership goes here, there's a lot coming in on Raheem Jarrett, and I just don't want to. If it's Raheem Jarrett chalk week again, I know Rutgers is soft, but I think it's probably an easier fade for me because he's 5-1. He's not 4-5 this time like he was against Michigan State, and if I was super invested in this game, I would just play my my dude Chigozeme Okonkwo again. I had to practice the name because I knew I was going to say it at 4-4. So still to the it's only been 2 weeks, but I get asked every week like who's this week's Okonkwo, and it's only been 2 weeks, but I feel this massive pressure that I got to find someone. But I like it. I like finding these sneaky guys. So maybe it's him again. But his price just doesn't move. He had another like 5 for 36 last week, so he had the targets. But Marcus Fleming, not to be confused with the other Fleming, is I think he's the third Maryland receiver at this point to suffer a season-ending injury. So I'm wondering if that's what's pushing this ownership towards Jarrett, because people expect him to get a lot of targets, and he does. And Carrier is there as well, but it's mainly going to be, Jarrett, Carrier, and Okonkwo that get those targets, and you can move the ball on Rutgers. So I guess I understand it, and he's there. So I just wanted to throw that out there. He does lead the team in targets with 72. It's 49 catches, 658 yards, 5 touchdowns. Okonkwo has a lot more quality targets. He has 55 to 72, but he has only 5 less catches. So he's catching a lot more, underneath stuff, not as deep. And when they get to the red zone, because he has 5 touchdowns as well, he's really looking his way. So I do still like him, and he's definitely in play, but I'm not looking at this game just yet. I'm trying to play 3 higher priced wide receivers, which isn't a build I've done very much this year. But that's what I'm looking at right now. But if I need a cheap guy, I feel pretty good about him. On the Rutgers side, and I'm not using, Baby Tua or the running game for Maryland, so I'm just going to kind of gloss over that. As far as Rutgers goes, Vidro playing, he's cheap, he can run. I mean, you can move the ball on Maryland, so you could do worse. This could be one of those troll Pacheco games where he gets like 12 carries but punches it in 3 times. Like, he has that ability, especially in this matchup. So he's only 3.9. If you're throwing on some lineups and you want some throwaway type plays, you can use him. As far as Rutgers, I do see ownership again coming in on Shameen Jones. I've kind of just done with him myself. I know he's 3.4, he's cheap, but the passing game just isn't there. Like, when we expect them to pass a couple weeks ago, they ran a lot, and they did it again, even though they got whooped on by Penn State. He just couldn't really throw the ball at all. He only had 1 catch. So I just don't see, even at 3.4, much upside at all. Or, I mean, obviously there's downside because you might get 1 catch, you might get no catches. If you want to go a Rutgers guy, I think you need to find that extra 1,000 and just go to Bo Melton, who's a much more, safe option, where he does have that floor of about, 4 or 5 catches, 50 yards, which we've talked about before. Again, last week he had 3 catches for 47. Had a carry. They're trying to get him involved. They're trying to get the ball in his hands. If they can't pass it to him, then they're going to try to give him carries, it looks like. And he's typically a double-digit guy. So I do like Bo Melton at 5.1. I would prefer him myself over Raheem Jarrett. Maybe that's a mistake, but that leverage, he has, just as good a chances of scoring a touchdown than Jarrett does. Maybe his targets will be a little less, but typically if they're passing, they're looking at Melton, especially with Cruikshank out for the year. So, again, another one of these games where there may be some points scored, but it's going to be probably random, and there's going to be a lot of variance with where it comes from. Because it might not even be Pacheco. If they get a rushing touchdown, it might be Montague or Aaron Young or somebody completely random. So I just wanted to harp on that I'm seeing ownership on Jones and Jarrett, and those are 2 guys that are pretty low down the chain for me, and they're not even in my main team player pool. So I may regret that by the time the lock is up and they've gone ham, but right now it doesn't look like a great spot with all these other options. So hearing that, does that make you want to, work in Jarrett, or were you already looking at him, or what do you think?
I think my main takeaway from this game is the total seems incredibly high. These are not good offenses. These are not, for the most part, explosive offenses, unless they happen to be playing Michigan State, and they're not, because they're playing each other. So, I think probably Okonkwo is the only piece that I would get excited about in this game, and of course Pacheco, because he has that ability to pound it in randomly, and he's sub 4K, and he would fit a lot of builds. But I don't see these offenses moving the ball a whole lot, and you usually have to do that to score points. So I just don't have a whole lot of interest in this game, despite the high Vegas total. I probably am going under on that.
Yeah.
So yeah, other than Okonkwo, not much interest for me.
Yeah, so that definitely looks like a spot that I'll be loading into the tracker as well, under 53, because I kind of thought the same thing. All right, next game, Alabama versus Auburn. We have a 57 total, 20.5 point spread for Bama. Could there be a chance Auburn slows down this Bama offense? Running back wise, maybe they could, but this offense, this passing offense is just, man, way. I mean, it's Alabama, so I can't just sit here and say I didn't think they'd be this good, but I didn't think Bryce Young would be maybe this good right away, and he really is. So what do you got for us on Bama versus Auburn?
Well, first thing I'll say is I will be accountable and say that Trey Sanders did not work out last week. We went to that for one of our 3K specials, and thinking that Alabama just run away with it against Arkansas. And Trey Sanders got 1 carry and had 1 catch. Got 36 yards on the catch, but that's obviously not going to get it done. So hat in hand, if you played, Trey Sanders trying to be cute like I did last week, I'm sorry about that. They don't all work out, and that's a good example of what doesn't work out. What probably will work out is just about anything you do on the Alabama side this week, maybe even Trey Sanders. I see them having a phenomenal game, and this being a phenomenal opportunity for them, for the offense in particular. If South Carolina was able to move the ball and do some stuff, and there wasn't a whole lot of tackling happening on the Auburn side. It's going to be a pretty good opportunity. Still don't really feel that I have a need to pay up for Bryce Young quite that high. He very much could have a good game, but he's also not the kind of guy that's going to run it 15 or 20 times and put up the double bonus game where you get the 300 yards rushing and the 300 yards passing and the 100 yards rushing. It's just that's not the kind of QB I would look to pay up for. He put up 46 points last week, so the ceiling game is there. I don't know that they're going to necessarily need it from him this time. Jameson Williams is just unstoppable. He 100 yards and 2 touchdowns seems to be the floor for him, and we're almost trending more to like 150 yards and 3 touchdowns being the floor, which is ridiculous for anyone, let alone a guy that's going up against SEC competition week in and week out. But man, he's on fire right now, and they might throw double coverage or triple coverage at him or whatever. But I think that Alabama's going to find a way to scheme him and get him open. So I really like Jameson Williams if you can get up to him. Marginally interested in Mechie. I think the discount is not quite enough for me to switch a significant portion of the interest over to Mechie. I think he'll still get his underneath targets and his PPR stuff, and I think he'll have a fine game. And if you're looking for a floor that's there, I think he has that. But I don't think he has the upside that Williams does at this point, and that's too bad because I think Mechie has a lot of talent in his own right. Probably don't want to go to anybody else in the wide receiver room. They used a bunch of tight ends, and I'm always expecting a Slade Bolden spike game to happen out of nowhere sometime, but can't really count on that, and just not seeing the volume. And then Robinson, yeah, he's okay. And if this slate context were a little bit different and I had a bunch of value receivers that I was going to plug in, I probably would give a little bit more of a nod to Robinson. But he's the same price as Williams, and I see a lot more explosiveness, and a lot, not even necessarily more attention because they give Robinson plenty of carries, but certainly explosiveness coming from Jameson Williams. And I think we can do better on a point per dollar basis than what Brian Robinson offers. And then on the Auburn side, I guess if you're interested in a run back, it would be Tank Bigsby. I think they have just gotten him incredibly involved in the offense, and they've had to because they don't have much of a quarterback left. So a lot of Tank Bigsby tomorrow, at least from a volume perspective. I question how efficient he's going to be against a pretty tough Alabama defense, but if he catches 8 balls for 60 yards in addition to the work he gets on the ground, falls into the end zone a time or two at 6,400, that's pretty good. So if I'm playing Bama guys, or even if I'm playing Williams, I'm probably thinking about running it back with Tank Bigsby.
Yeah, man, Auburn's been on like the late night slate and stuff a lot, and he was under 6K a lot, and last week especially in South Carolina, I was really huge on him, and he was only like 20% owned or something, so it was nice to get that from him before this matchup. And I think he still could potentially pay it off if he scores a touchdown or two, but yeah, I'm never excited about Brian Robinson, and that sometimes that's to my detriment. I did try to use him on a secondary slate, and it just didn't get excited about it, and the salary is just too high. So I agree with the Williams assessment there. Mechie's been doing well as but he just doesn't have that excitement. And then Jaleel Billingsley, before I started here on my own site, early in the season we were always using him, and it was like, yeah, this guy's a cheat code, and then he got kind of hurt, and then he just fell off. So it's tough to use anybody, but at least the targets are really going to be, whereas in the past Bama would have a 3-4 receiver situation, you'd be pulling your hair out with Ruggs and company, but it's really concentrated amongst Williams and Mechie, so where it's going to come. And it was a perfect storm for Bryce Young. He ended up I think he got close, or he outscored Stroud or whatever, but Arkansas kept it close, so he had to throw almost 600 yards, 5 touchdowns, and then Williams outscores all of our Ohio State guys because he was involved in 8 catches, 190. So it was a really perfect storm for that leverage of Bama to pay off, and I don't see Auburn having that same level of success. So I'm okay with fading Bama this time, although I seem to say that every slate, and then I'm not when they go off. So we'll see. All right, Oregon State versus Oregon, 61 over under, kind of high, -7 on the Oregon side. This is a time where I think that Travis Dye you can go back to him again, but he's going to be low owned. He's been really chalky lately. We were using him all the time in that, mid 7K range. And then he got up near to almost 9K. And now he's back down at a decent level to look at. And people are going to be scared off by the Utah, game. And people even in our Discord were like, well, what happened? And it's like, well, it's pretty clear that he just got scripted out. And yes, he does catch balls as well, but that was just an awful game for Anthony Brown. Utah's defense clamped down. They ran the ball. It was just everything was going against Dye in that one. So you can waive that. I would have liked to have seen him like drop to 6-8 or something. That would have been kind of cool, but then everyone would have him. So he's definitely in play. He's a big time, like I said, receiver. He's second on the team in targets with 41, right behind Devin Williams with 43. So he's definitely going to get that volume on both sides, and they'll be much more successful against Oregon State, Oregon State's defense has been solid. They're certainly beatable, especially on the ground. And then my guy Brian Cardwell, who I'd been using at 3K a couple of times, secret's out on him. He's 4K now, so it's not as good of a play. He's going to get his 10 to 12 touches. He could get a touchdown, but I think it's really just die or bust. I'm never using Anthony Brown. I just don't. If he beats me one week, it's fine. And then with the receivers, Red's out. Johnson was out. DJ Johnson's been banged up. I think at one point Franklin was banged up, but he's back. So it's starting to get to a point where you could consider Oregon receivers because they're dropping like flies, but I'm still not there yet to where I'm ready to do it. I could see people maybe considering using Devin Williams because he's been the most consistent, but 6'2" just feels like an awful price for an Oregon receiver when I was never willing to pay even 4K for one. So I'm not going to start now. And then the same thing on Oregon State. As far as the receivers go, they have a ton of them that are involved. My favorite's Sariah Beeson, just because last year I hit a couple touchdown games with him, and I kind of was reading scouting reports, and I was really high on him, and I thought he was going to be a stud this year, and it hasn't worked out. But Champ Flemings could go off one week. Lindsey, Bradford's kind of, the high price guy. I think their best weapon for DFS purposes is Trishawn Harrison, just because he gets carries. He catches balls. He's kind of a touchdown equity guy. So he's okay. But I think the Oregon, side of things is going to do a lot more damage this week. They're going to be up for this game. And I'm just not really that interested in anyone. If I was going to use Oregon State, gun to head, I had to do it. It'd be BJ Baylor, but we're not getting that good of a discount or anything. He's 7-1. When I could go up to die for 500 more. Baylor is a high volume guy. He's rushed for over 1,200 yards, 12 touchdowns. He has a couple catches, 6 catches. He's coming off a pretty solid game against ASU where he ran for 150. But he's not hitting these 20 plus games enough to really, in consideration, but he is a volume guy if you need it. He feels like to me like an afternoon slate play when we're going to be talking to, when guys are asking about those, I could see using him on that smaller afternoon slate, but not on main. So that's pretty much it. I have some more exciting games to talk about, as we're getting through the slate here, but these first few are just kind of, again, meh for me, where I could take it or leave it with Baylor and stuff. So, BJ Baylor, that is. So I'm ready to move on to the next one, unless you want to interject with any of the Oregon guys.
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough, even for me to get to die. I think that there's just there's guys that I would want to pay a smidge more for to get up to, and then there's guys I'd like to pay down to that are quite a bit lower, and so he's just he's in that middle ground, which probably ownership will be a little bit lower because of that, at least the way that I'm thinking about it. But that's probably the main guy that I would consider, and I would have loved to see more consistency on the Oregon State side from like a Tyon Lindsey, who I thought was going to be pretty good going into the season, and thought he was going to be kind of the guy that they schemed to, but he's just put up dud after dud. I think the only game he's had that was any good was against SC, and so just hard to trust that position group, and BJ Baylor, price is a little bit too much. I feel the same way about Dye that I do about him.
Yeah, and quarterbacks it's been a rough go. They had a lot of injuries last year. Gebbia, he looked good at times, Nolan. And then they brought in, Sam Neuer, and I was kind of excited. I thought, well, they got all these weapons and a guy who can throw the football, and then he looked horrible in the system, and they haven't played him since week 3. So, yeah, quarterback play has just victimized the receivers, because if they could get somebody in there to throw them the ball, then, man, I think we'd be talking about them a lot more as DFS plays. All right, next game on the slate, and this is one that you wouldn't think of being fantasy goodness, but I'm actually kind of looking at this one or two plays for my main. Northwestern versus Illinois. We have 44.5 over under, so I know it's low, but Illinois minus 6.5. The volume on Northwestern is really, really concentrated in Illinois. Both these teams should be able to run on each other, I feel like. So what do you think about this one? And prices are cheap, so I know it's not a sexy game on paper, but there might be some fantasy goodness, right?
Yeah, that was almost exactly my takeaway, especially after I didn't watch the game, the Northwestern game last week, but I did check in on the Gamecast every now and then. It was like Evan Hull carries for 3 yards. Hull carries for 5 yards. And it was like, man, do they have any other players? What is going on? So he got an insane amount of volume. I don't know. Maybe you have it pulled up on what the exact
25 carries, and then he had I think it was 8 targets. He caught 6 of them. So he was just all in.
I mean, just in terms of involvement in an offense, you got to pay attention to anybody that's getting that much volume. And I think he's actually got a pretty good matchup too. And so you would look at that combination and be like, okay, well, then he's got to be 7K. So I have to consider him against the top backs. And no, turns out he's only 5,800, right? So when I keep referring to guys that I'm looking to pay down for, Evan Hull's going to be one of those guys. Feels weird to say. Northwestern doesn't make it, to the top of the radar on a massive slate like this very often, but I've got to give some consideration there. And I'll give a shout to Stephon Robinson as well, who was, it was probably to Stephon Robinson's detriment that Evan Hull was so involved, despite the game script kind of dictating that should have been more Stephon Robinson, right? But maybe they're not comfortable throwing it downfield a whole lot or something like that. So it could flip this week. We never know these things for sure, but I think between those two, I'm probably looking more at Evan Hull as somewhat of a pay down at the running back position. And then on the other side, at the exact same price, in an equally tantalizing matchup is Chase Brown. And I think his PrizePicks number was like 97.5. So they're expecting some volume to go to Chase Brown and for him to be fairly efficient with that volume as well. Always a little dicey to stack running backs on both sides of a game. So I don't know that I'm necessarily correlating the play, because, if one of them's getting a lot of time of possession, the other one's not on the field, right? So I don't know that I'm necessarily going to do that, but one of those two in this game at the exact same price, I probably like Hull a little bit more. He seemed to, have consistent involvement in the passing game, and they don't necessarily like to throw the ball downfield a ton, it seems. But either of those are in play. And then I'll also give a shout to Juice Williams, who they always seem to find a way to give the ball to around the goal line. Former quarterback, lots of athleticism. Is Northwestern versus Illinois? I guess it's a rivalry game. So we'll count that. Sometimes coaches will empty their bag of tricks in a game like this at the end of the season. So little bit of interest in Juice Williams at 4K if you do need to pay down at a receiver spot. But that's, more of a GPP dart throw. I'm really more focused on the running games for these two teams from a main lineup perspective.
Yeah, and what kind of gives, credence to Hull over Brown is the fact that we know, Evan's going to be getting all those carries in the backfield and most of the receptions, it looks like. So whereas Illinois, there's been times where it looked like a Chase Brown game this earlier in the season, and then all of a sudden it was Josh McCray, or they were giving carries to Jakari Norwood, or the Reggie Love kid. They liked it. It seemed like for a while they were in love with a different running back every game, and it was super frustrating. So I'm not going to lie, I'm really still kind of antsy about the thought of Chase Brown. I did write him in my article that just released an hour or two ago as one of the top 3 guys at the position. But I would be remiss if I said, yeah, it's a home run slam dunk. If he gets the carries, 30 carries, like he should, then yeah, it's a slam dunk. But it's just, I don't know, man. If something, hits the coaching staff the wrong way, it's instantly they're putting in Norwood, and then all of a sudden he's got the next 3 series. So I'm definitely nervous about that.
If you want to do the worst possible thing and be a game log watcher, you can go all the way back to week 5. And so week 5, he had 26 carries. Next week, he had 8 carries. Week 8, 33 carries. Week 9, 18. Week 10, 32. And then last week he had 13. And most of that is game script. And that's why I kind of joke and kid about that. But if you're going by that every other week thing, it's time for him to get 30 carries again. So it is certainly possible and within the range of outcomes, but it's a much more likely outcome that Hull gets that volume. So them being the same price, I'm probably trending towards Hull, but I'm probably going to use both in different lineups.
Yeah. I just remember it was way back in the beginning of the season, and Brown, I think Chase Brown started, and he was kind of chalky. It was against Nebraska, and then all of a sudden they were running every other running back. They were pulling guys off the street. It was just super, super frustrating. But I'm going to have exposure to both. One of them in the main, I agree. And then as far as Robinson goes, people, obviously people were upset because there was other value guys that were. Milton Wright was going absolutely nuts. I was kind of on him a couple weeks ago. I was too early, unfortunately, but it wasn't as if Robinson was like this complete, dud. That's what hurt. Like a normal week 553, a carry or two for 11, 10 points was okay. And this game script set up so well for him that you would have thought he would have more than 7 targets. When
but you needed like 35 from every receiver spot to be competitive, right? So it was like, exactly. In the dust.
Yeah. So he wasn't that bad. I could see him kind of bounce back here and do well. All right. Next game, Penn State. So here. Oh no, not that one. Wisconsin, Minnesota. Got ahead of myself. So Wisconsin versus Minnesota, 39 total. So we're even lower than the one we just talked about. -7 for Wisconsin. So close game. That could mean only one thing really, and that's Braylon Allen, right? So Allen, I guess we were victims. I was going to say he was a victim of not being able to go in my lineup, but I was victim not putting him in because obviously last week was, Ohio State. We ran a lot of those guys. We had Haskins who, it didn't work out. Would have loved to have gotten and just paid the price for Allen and knowing that he's going to get all these carries in a close game. And if this game stays close, which I don't know if it will, maybe, I mean, the spread's close, but I could see them winning by more. Minnesota's offense is kind of, it's been better, but, Allen's just, man, he's rock solid. Like, I think his floor at this point is like 28 to 30 fantasy points right now as it stands because of how much volume he gets. And his touchdown equity when they get in the goal line, like, yeah, they'll throw the ball a little bit. Like against Northwestern, they threw a couple touchdowns and we were getting frustrated, but he put up 40. So how frustrated could we really be? It's 8-7. It's the highest price he's been all season, but I'm seriously considering trying to get to it. And this is where getting these cheap guys at quarterback who we're going to talk about these next few games and are going to help with that. But also I want to pay up at wide receiver. So I have a real big decision to make if I want to take Allen and kind of guarantee myself 28, or if I want to, go the Bell Dotson, Keaton Thompson role and really shoot for the stars and hope that all those guys hit their 40. So at a $1,500 discount. So I'm really on edge about that. But Allen at this point he's only 17 years old. That's the part I keep coming back to on him is like, how good is this guy? Is he like the next, it's Wisconsin, so it's kind of cheesy to say, but is he like the next JT? Like this guy's got Taylor-esque, qualities about him, and he's only 17, tearing up the Big Ten. So his last 2 games alone, 401 yards and 6 touchdowns at 17. So I can't get that out of my head that this guy was just wrecking high school kids a year ago. And it's wild to see. So he's a guaranteed 100+ in his score as his floor. So 8-7, we just paid 9-1 for Deuce and we paid $10K for Lunik and so why wouldn't I pay 8-7? It's just going to depend on how much I want to be married to these receivers and how cheap I'm going to go at quarterback, I guess. But Allen is really, and he's that guy. As far as everyone else on Wisconsin, they did good against Northwestern, and then it kind of seemed like against Nebraska, they, Kendrick Pyre caught a touchdown against them. He's kind of been looking good the last few weeks, but I think you're getting really too cute. And I had my fill of getting cute at receiver today with the, the Kiki Chisholm, chalk, and then me going to Husky Dove, and then me seeing Devon Bailey out there for Utah, 25% owned. I don't think he got like a single, he got snaps. So I don't think he got a target even. And I just don't want to do it. I don't want my fill. I've had my fill of that. And I want to go back to my cheap quarterback against Michigan State and my reliable running back and guys that I know are going to get targeted. So I'm leaning towards that. That means Braylon Allen's really the only one from this game. I typically don't target against Wisconsin too much either. Nebraska had some guys who did well last week against them. Ottman Bell at 4.2 is a really interesting price. He's had a couple games where he looked just unstoppable, and especially recently against Iowa, he had 5.109 and a touchdown, and then just last week he had 2 touchdowns. I was referring to the game against Nebraska where he had 11.103.1. That was the game back in it was like week 7 where I thought he was going to become this reliable guy that we could use every week, and his price was going to be high all the time, but it hasn't happened. So if anybody on Minnesota were to go off, it would certainly be Ottman Bell, and at 4.2. I do think he's playable, but it would be a GPP type of thing. And then looking at Minnesota, Kai Thomas, who we've used in the past, he's coming off a big game against Indiana. So his price is $7K. I'm not paying that. I would say I'd assume you wouldn't either. And then 5.2 for Marquise Irving. He's been getting, big carries. They're relying on the run a lot. So it's both teams are going to want to try to establish the run. Both teams have really good running backs, but at the end of the day, I think Braylon Allen's just going to do whatever he wants to do. And he's 22 to 25 carries. If Minnesota can match and keep it close, he could approach 30 carries pretty early. My worry for him is not right now, but by his sophomore year or whatever, junior year, having too much mileage on him. So I'm concerned about that at some point, that they're going to start pulling back on his workload. But as of now, he's the guy that should be he probably should be 10K today, actually, like Lunik, because he's getting that type of usage and, quality goal line carry. So that's where I'm at with this game and Braylon Allen. Do you envision yourself getting to Braylon Allen? I know we both last week we talked about it and said, yeah, he's a nice luxury play. And then, of course, we look at it and it's like, damn, we should have just played him. So do you think that's going to happen again where we're just wishing we played him or what?
Well, so I think I said that you probably said that. I said that too, last week. And then on the show earlier this week, I think we were saying that about Breece Hall.
Yeah. And and it happened.
and Breece Hall was the dude you wanted to have today.
Yep.
And so I think we can't get caught up too much in recency bias, but there is probably something to, man, this dude is really good and gets a lot of volume and plays on a team that is going to be able to control the game for the most part and do what they want to do and impose their will. And if what they want to do is hand it to the guy 30, 35 times, yeah, we should probably play that guy. Now you have to consider price, and I get all that, but that's kind of my reasoning when, I'm less interested in a guy like Dye. I'm more interested in a guy that is going to get the guaranteed volume and have the guaranteed goal line work, and just find a way to fit other pieces around him. So, yeah, it is going to be tough to work in him and Travion and use some of these higher priced receivers in Williams and Dotson. Like you just can't have a lineup with everybody in it, right? But he's definitely a piece that I will be prioritizing. It's weird to say. I think the total was 39.5 last I saw it. So, weird to say I'm going to be prioritizing a guy in a total that low, but it's partially that low because they're going to run him 30 times. So I think that, yeah, Braylon Allen's definitely in play for me. And until further notice, Braylon Allen's probably in play for me.
Yeah, and that's the thing people don't think about as much, like, oh, that's totals, 39, 40, whatever. But this guy's going to score 21 of those 40. So when you look at it like that, it's not so bad. All right, so we have 3 games left. I made a mistake in assigning this to both of us, so we can both talk about it. You can start off, though. But Purdue versus Indiana, we have a 50.5 over-under is what I saw, I believe, which seemed kind of low, but they're 15-point favorites, Purdue. Maybe that means, they're not going to throw it as much, but they don't have a running game to really lean on. So I do like Aidan O'Connell here again. His price never changes, and Indiana's been getting kind of beat up. They were not a team to target against for fantasy purposes like mid-season, but now they've suddenly just been bleeding fantasy points to most positions. So why don't you kick us off here? I already mentioned I like Aidan O'Connell, but where are you looking at here? Because there's a lot of weapons here. Chase opportunities with Milton Wright, whose price is probably out. David Bell, old reliable. So there's a lot to look at here. Who do you like?
Yeah, so I think I'll start on the Indiana side. I don't know who Indiana's quarterback is. I don't know that Indiana knows who Indiana's quarterback is, and they're having trouble moving the ball because of it. And so what that tells me is that there's going to be a lot of Purdue having the ball, and Purdue doesn't know how to run the ball. And so unless it's with Jackson Anthrop, who's probably, a guy that we're going to be interested in again this week. I think you really can't go wrong with it. It's kind of like the Braylon Allen situation in reverse, right? All Purdue knows how to do is pass. And so as many parts of that passing game as you can get, they're going to have the ball. They're going to probably be able to do what they want to do, and what they want to do is pass. So probably going to mean a lot of David Bell. Price is getting up there on David Bell. I'm less interested at him at this price than I was when he was in the mid 6s. And that 10 catch 80-yard game that he's accustomed to having is going to be enough at that price, right? We probably need him to get the bonus and a touchdown at this price point. Not necessarily from a point per dollar perspective, but from who he's going up against price wise. He's in the Ohio State wide receiver tier now. And so whoever it is that has the spike game of the Ohio State wide receivers is probably going to have a higher ceiling than David Bell in this matchup. Just because they're going to be in a competitive game. I don't know how Indiana plans on moving the ball, and I don't think that they're going to be able to keep up. Maybe they'll do what Northwestern did and just run it, a ton regardless of the game script, and throw to the running back because they don't want to throw downfield. Problem with that is I don't know who the running back is either. It seems like they are just hurt at every position that matters for DFS purposes, and poor Ty Fogle. I think we say that every week, but it's just this would be a fantastic Ty Fogle spot, but you got to have a quarterback to get him the ball, and so I think Bell in GPP, Anthrop as more of a main. I don't know if I've seen a price jump like the one on Milton Wright, going all the way up to the sixes after being, I think he was 3.9 last week. So I think probably Anthrop and Bell, and then a lot of Aidan O'Connell, because I think he'll have the keys to the offense and be able to do just about whatever he wants. So I like him a lot in this spot.
Yeah, you make a good point, because so it's good for me to go on do the show and talk, because we don't always get this opportunity with life, but this makes us kind of hash it out. And at first, writing it up, I'm really high on Bell. I have him pretty well cored, but you bring up a good point about the price, and now I am thinking about it more, a little worried about the emergence of Milton Wright. I did notice his target share was increasing. That's why I used him 2-3 weeks ago against Sparty, and he didn't do all that much that game, but I noticed that there was a change occurring, and I couldn't have predicted last week. I mean, no one could have. They say they could, they're lying, but the target share is just so massive now. He's up to 71 compared to David Bell's 125. So clearly he's cutting into it, and Bell's touchdown equity has really plummeted to the point where it does scare me, because Jackson Anthrop is getting these rushing opportunities instead of receiving. And then he's also catching touchdown passes. And then you can't forget about Payne Durham, the talented tight end. When they get to the red zone, they are going to still look his way. And now Milton Wright, scoring multiple touchdowns a game. So the equity of his to score is really troublesome. Where I do love him is the fact that Aidan knows he's going to be able to just, instead of run the ball, they use David Bell and Anthrop to an extent as their running back, right? Like 7 yards to David Bell, 4 yards to David Bell, 3 yards to David Bell. That's their running game. And they did that a lot with Rondale Moore. I know Rondale Moore had a lot more like slate breaking type plays, I guess. But Bell's just going to rack up those PPR points, and he's had 11 plus catches in 3 straight. His target share is still sky high. But yeah, the 12-101 no touchdowns for 25 points is good, but you're definitely there's a plethora of guys in his range that could be looking at 40s, and that's just last week we felt really good with Olave at 36 against the chalk Addison. But then Addison dropped a 50 bomb on our heads, and it wasn't so good. So right. You get into these talented receivers where, yeah, we know we're going to get 25 from David Bell no matter what. Is it going to be enough? I think in cash games, it's certainly, if you're running Aidan O'Connell like me, I think you'd still want to go Bell. Obviously not Milton Wright at his price. I'm not prepared to pay that price yet. And he made Jesse Matthews tomorrow, though. Who knows? The old SDSU Jesse Matthews game. But and then Anthrop, who's 4.4, I like. And Durham at 3.5. I still like Payne Durham, even though he's fallen off because all these guys. Payne Durham is only 4 weeks removed from a 112-1 game. So, I mean, he's not like he forgot how to play football all of a sudden. They just have a lot of weapons. So this is all to say that, yes, David Bell is very fadeable, I think, in large field and, tournaments in general. But in cash games, I just feel like he's a really safe option that I want to build around if you're playing Aidan O'Connell at quarterback. If you're not playing Aidan O'Connell at quarterback, then you can get away from him. It looks like Aidan's going to be drawing a lot of ownership. He has a second, actually looks like he's going to be the highest right now. I mean, I look at 2 sites and they're not always accurate, but it looks like he's going to be a top 2 or 3 owned quarterback at 6.5. We've been using him for a while. The Sparty thing, I hit it hard on that one. That's really when, I mean, we knew the secondary was bad before, but Cade McNamara the week before really became apparent. So now everyone's using a quarterback against Sparty, and that's the thing. But O'Connell's just continued that on. I mean, against Ohio State, he looked great, 30 points. Against Northwestern, he threw for 400 plus yards, and Northwestern secondary up to that point had been solid. So at 6.5, he's still giving us enough upside, regardless of matchup, to where he can do damage. And like I said, Indiana the last couple of weeks has just completely fallen apart on the defensive side when they were actually pretty decent throughout the season. So I think it's tough in cash and single entry to not use Aidan O'Connell. I'm not a chalk, slave or anything. And ownership, I usually look to get away from a guy, but this is right. Aidan's in my wheelhouse of quarterback price that I like to pay. I've used him already 2 of the last 3 weeks. So I'm pretty close to just playing him again and pairing him up with Bell. So I definitely still like that. And then as far as Fogle goes, his price is 4.8. And yeah, it's terrible. He has 93 targets. I will say he's being targeted heavily, but his catch rate under 50%. He has 45 receptions. So there's not a lot of catchable balls going his way. They're throwing it in his direction, but he would have to be Mr. Stretch to catch some of these balls because the quarterbacks they continue to use they're pretty awful. But this Purdue offense is going to put up a big score again. I think at this point they're just an unstoppable force on the passing side of things. With that being said, though, there's Jameson Williams and Ohio State. I mean, there's options to definitely spread out. All right, next game. Let's jump. I'll go first, and you can end it with the Virginia game. So Penn State versus Michigan State, 52 over under. I've got -3.5 for Penn State. This is the spot to use guys against Michigan State. We know that. I won't harp about that. I was hoping, and I'm probably going to butcher her last name because I didn't look it up before the show. I tried to do that. But Christian, I think it's Valu. He's only 4.5. He had a great game with Clifford sick last week against Rutgers. He threw for 235, 3 touchdowns. He rushed for 36 yards, 25 fantasy points, and basically min price for a quarterback. So I was really hoping it was going to be him. I know he would have been chalky, but I could have done some serious damage with my lineup. So it sounds like Clifford's going to play, and that's okay. He's 6'1", so he's also cheap. So you can run a Clifford, AOC lineup for, 12K, 13K, something like that, and get some really powerful performances. I will say with Clifford, though, I'm less confident. I'm very confident in Aidan. Like at this point, I know what I'm going to get with him, and he's going to deliver. Clifford may give me 165 in a good matchup. If I'm talking about passing yards, he may throw for 400. He's just very up and down, and it with the weapons he has, it really shouldn't be that way. And I know he was sick and had some other stuff going on, and they tried to play through it and whatever. But sounds like he's fully recovered, and I demand 28 plus fantasy points at this price if I'm going to use him, and less would be fine. I mean 20 to 22 wouldn't kill me, but this is the matchup where at this point we just expect guys to crush. And I continue to use McNamara because you talked about him, you don't want to use him against Ohio State, and he's not that talented a quarterback, but he lit these guys up, and he looks like a Heisman candidate against them. So Clifford has to be able to do it. Clifford has minor rushing upside in the past. He hasn't shown it so much as lately. I think their line is – I didn't look at grades on the line lately, but their O-line was graded pretty poorly at one time. But, yeah, at 6'1", I think he's very much in play. And it another team where their running game is definitely better than Purdue's, but you don't have one guy where you can sit here and say, give them the rock and they're going to go to town. I mean, Kevon Lee's looked okay. Noah Cain's had, games where he's been decent, but mostly he's going to give you like 11 for 43. Devin Ford hasn't done anything this year. John Lovett's been banged up, but when he's been out there, he's been, 13 carries for 18 yards. There's just not a lot to like for this running game. And I think a lot of it, like I said, has to do with their O-line, but they don't have any running backs that's just going to burn a good matchup anyways. So that leads us to Jahan Dotson, who's 7'9", so he's 600 more than David Bell, but I mean, he's the guy that they're throwing the ball to. And then you have Parker Washington, who I think if he's not super high owned tomorrow, I'll be shocked, and I'll also feel great about it because at 4-1, I'm really struggling with not having him in my lineup. If I want Keaton Thompson from Virginia, I typically don't play 4 wide receivers, but I would consider it with Parker. 3 of his last 4 games, he's been in double-digit fantasy points. He's getting a real decent target share, and at that price, he could very easily with the targets in this game, he could be the one to outscore Dotson. He does have 53 targets, 662 yards, 3 touchdowns. The last couple of games, let me just pull that up real quick because I can't remember everything. Against Rutgers, 9 targets, 6 catches, and then Michigan 5 targets, Maryland 8, and Ohio State 9. So he's hovering between that 8 and 9 target range. 9 targets against Michigan State at 4-1 is slate shattering type of ceiling. And he can definitely do it. His touchdown equity hasn't been great, but it's really him and Dotson. Lambert Smith had a couple of weeks where he was okay, but he's kind of inconsistent. Dotson, 129 targets, 83 catches, over 1,000 yards, and 10 touchdowns. So Dotson is a guy that I was really, really the most I've been tilted a lot this season, but the most tilted I've been was that game where he dropped 56 on Maryland. I talked him up on the write-up. I had him in my lineups, and then I went into Bell and a couple other things and got a little too cutesy, and he went just completely ballistic. That's the most mad I've been, I think, of the season. So he's priced really well though at 7.9. I mean, he was almost 9K a couple weeks ago against Michigan. He's had a couple of, for him, down games. He's still scoring 15 to 17 fantasy points in down games, which is really nice, right? So this is a game for him to just completely bust out and get 10 catches for 200 yards, a couple of touchdowns. So an excellent pairing partner with Clifford. This, in my mind, I was envisioning Aidan O'Connell, Clifford, and then Dotson and David Bell, like those four guys. Then if I could get Keaton with those guys, like I'd feel great and get to the, Garwell and stuff. That to me feels like a really strong cash build, single entry build, but I also don't want to hamstring my last few spots and be playing Towski Dove. So I really have to see how I want to do this. And do I want to take Braylon Allen over one of those receivers? Because, at this point, Bell and Dotson are high enough to where we have to have that conversation. As far as Michigan State goes, I did drop a tweet in Discord, but it sounds like they could have potentially up to 20 players on both sides of the ball out. So that's going to be tough. We won't know who that is probably until later, but I mean, Naylor's been having the Q tag, Jaden Reed has it, but these are guys in addition to like just funky injuries that they've got like illnesses, so there's something going on to where Michigan State might be down half a team. And if that's the case, Penn State may just obliterate them early. And then it might be a situation where we're not getting a full 4 quarters of Dotson, and they are trying to run the ball with, Kevon, or they're throwing the ball to Lambert, or Clifford doesn't have to play more than a half and they go to Valu. So I do have that concern about a blowout, Clifford being sick or whatever, and them not playing him a full game. So I don't want to put that negative juju in people's minds, but that's definitely something that I think could happen. Do you, I don't know if you were in the Discord when I posted that or if you saw that, but does that put you, in a spot where you may consider fading Penn State, or are you just like, no, I'll take my raw points in 3 quarters and hope for the best?
So, yeah, I mean, I think until we know who those people are, it's tough for me to make a call one way or the other on how to treat that news. I recall last year in, seeing there's 25 guys out for Arkansas State, and, well, okay. But if it's like a bunch of guys that aren't even on the 2 deep, that doesn't really change anything for me, right? And what it does do, or what it has the potential to do if there's offensive guys, is really concentrate the volume of the offense, right? And so Michigan State's already pretty concentrated anyway, but if it were on a team like a Florida, for example, that had like this ridiculous receiver room where 12 different guys are getting catches every week, but 6 of them are out with some kind of illness, sometimes that's helpful. And so from the perspective of, does it now result in a blowout for Penn State? Spread looks like it's still 4.5. And so if there's anybody that's crucial to this game that's missing, we don't know who that is yet. And so I'm probably right now going to play this one straight, as though there were going to be no great impact. And so, yeah, I want to play Dotson against Michigan State. That's like the best possible scenario, like a just alpha wide receiver of all alphas against the best possible matchup. It's kind of like if Wilson had the wide receiver room entirely to himself against Michigan State last week, right? And yeah, Parker Washington, yeah, you gotta factor that in too. But Dotson's clearly the alpha, and I think unless Michigan State is missing like 4 of their 5 offensive linemen and just aren't going to move the ball at all, I think that you can still go to Dotson here. I'm a little bit less inclined to go to Clifford because he's not Jerkovich cheap. He's not Stoneman. He's not 4,500. You do still have to pay for him. He's not great, and the bulk of his production is probably going to go to one of two receivers. So I think I'm more inclined to just play those two receivers. He might scamper in there, on his own, but I would still probably trend his receivers. He's not going to get, the volume of running that some other quarterbacks might. And I think there's, better potential at the same price in other spots at quarterback. So I'm probably not as high on Clifford, but I'm still very high on the receivers in this one.
Yeah, hard not to be, man. So I get it. It's one of those spots where it's maybe not as simple of a slam dunk as it might look on paper, but yeah, Dotson's got to be that guy. All right, last game to take us home before we talk prize picks and maybe a little core action is Virginia Tech versus Virginia. 63.5 total. That is the second highest, and we have Virginia -7. Brennan Armstrong, there was talk of him missing last week, but he said, no, I am going to play and throw up, another big game on Pitt and push them a little bit. So, he did like a 31 fantasy point day, which is just another day in the office for him. 9.8K, big time play. A lot to like in Virginia games. Virginia Tech's defense isn't very good. So what's the word here with Virginia? Because the prices aren't cheap, but as the hammer, they're going to be putting up some points.
Yeah. So this is another one of those situations where it's just crushing that it's at the end of the slate because I don't know where to go yet until we know what Virginia Tech is doing at quarterback. That's going to completely change the dynamic of this game and how I treat it and who I want to go to. If they go with Burmeister and kind of do what they've been doing all year, I think that's a scenario that this game hopefully stays a little bit closer and we get, the fullest potential of Brennan Armstrong. If they go with Blumrick and we get, some kind of news that Blumrick is playing, Blumrick is not going to throw the ball. That's not really what he does. Let me just pull up the number because it was something ridiculous. What did he ran the ball 20 times last week and didn't even didn't even play the whole game, right? So he was basically like a Tim Tebow if Tim Tebow didn't ever pass the ball through 11 times. And if they decide they're going to do that again, Virginia's defense is terrible and they're going to get 4 to 6 yards every time they do that or hand off to a running back. And this is just going to be a death by a million paper cuts kind of game because Virginia can't stop even the most rudimentary offense, which is what that is. And if that's the case, I don't think I have a whole lot of interest in Brennan Armstrong and his cadre of talented, explosive wide receivers. If we get a real football game where they're going to throw the ball a decent amount and time of possession will be fairly even and it's not going to just bleed all kinds of clock, and that would be a Braxton Burmeister game. As long as he's healthy, I'd have some interest in Trey Turner. Probably not a ton of interest in the running game. I kind of always seem to get the whole Blackshear thing wrong whenever I try to get cute on that side. There's too much uncertainty of volume there. But on the Virginia side, assuming we get Burmeister on the Tech side, I'm pretty interested in Brennan Armstrong. I don't think anyone's going to be on him with, Stroud and Young and Hartman all having gone earlier in the day. I think it's just going to be pretty tempting to use one of those guys and not save that much salary for a guy that might not even get on the field as much as he needs to if Virginia Tech just decides that they're going to run the ball all day. But getting a low-owned Brennan Armstrong as the late hammer is incredibly appealing, especially if you have the fortitude to pair him with either Wicks for kind of a GPP play or Keaton Thompson with more of a cash play. Although Keaton Thompson put up a ridiculous game in his own right last week. Had, 11 catches for 126 yards and a touchdown, and then also ran for a touchdown. I mean, if that's a cash play, that's a heck of a cash play, and that's probably pretty close to his ceiling. I mean, 40 points is going to be pretty close to any wide receiver's ceiling, but he's very involved in the offense, and I watched a good amount of that game. It was literally just Wicks and Thompson. Billy Kemp played, was coming off the field gimpy after just about every time he caught the ball, and then was also returning kicks for some reason. So I don't understand that at all. And I've been a Billy Kemp guy for a long time, but it seems like Keaton Thompson's kind of taken over that role of, short to intermediate, safety valve, get a first down on a third down kind of play. So yeah, I'm very interested in this game if this game is playable, and I'm not interested at all if we get Blumrick, other than probably playing Blumrick because that's an insane amount of rushing volume from that quarterback spot. If you get 20 carries for over 100 yards and a touchdown, or maybe even 2, you're in great shape from that position. And this is the kind of defense you want to be going up against with that kind of offense. So that would kind of be my take in both of those scenarios. Unfortunately, we probably don't know, at least for the main slate, what's going to happen with that call in time to factor all of that in. But if you want to leave a ton of salary and hope we get news, that's always an option. Or I'm sure they're on the later slate too, if you want to get some exposure that way.
Yeah. And that's a good point on all that stuff. I've been a big Keaton Thompson guy since, I was complaining, why isn't DraftKings? Because I was noticing him doing this stuff, and FanDuel had moved him from QB to wide receiver, but DK hadn't yet. And it was like, man, we're missing out on all this guy's volume. And it's just every week the progression. He has 47 targets his last 4 games, and they're getting involved in the rushing game, and he's kind of they're not phasing Billy Kemp out, but like you said, he's returning kicks because it's like there's no targets for him to be had, and Virginia has such a cachet of talented pass catchers, but Thompson just does so much with the ball that it's hard to get it to the other guys. So I'm a big Thompson guy. I really want to fit him into my lineup. I got him in the afternoon slate last week, but that was another one that I was kind of complaining about. I felt bad about not getting him in, and then he exploded against Pittsburgh like I thought he would. And they have good, like the tight end Jelani Woods is good. Rashawn Henry showed out before, so they have talented guys. It's just with Wicks, being the deep threat and Thompson doing everything else, there's really no more room for anyone else. And at 7-2, I think Thompson feels to me a little underpriced because he keeps churning out these 25 to 28 point games. 40 against Pitt, like you said, it's probably a ceiling, but shoot, even earlier in the season, he was putting up 20, 21 fantasy points. So he just feels like a very, very safe play to me because of all the volume he's going to get. I got to make some decisions because obviously I want to play Allen, but I want these 3 wide receivers I have in my head. So it's going to be tough, but you bring up a good point because if Blumrick's going to be in there, they're going to be milking the clock like an academy school. Then that might hurt Thompson a little bit, obviously, with his targets, but his quality targets could still help him out. So a lot to think about for this one. We have, we just had a giant slate today. We have another one tomorrow. So it's a lot to process, but if you make that call and save that salary or get exposure to this game where everyone else is kind of afraid, you could be looking at a big payday. So I do want to talk about PrizePicks. Let me see. Let's pull that up, but let me see if there's any questions, because I think people have been asking here. Yeah, smash the like for sure. Thank you, Brayden. Michigan State could have. Okay, yeah, this is all stuff we talked about. All right, sorry guys, I meant to look at that sooner. Can you guys go over top owned plays on DK? Yes, let me pull that up real quick because I did to mention it, but look at that ownership. Sorry, I got one of my daughters still awake. All right. Let's start at quarterback. I'll give you some ownership that I'm seeing on two different sites. And then I talk to people around the industry. I try to get a good gauge. But right now you're looking at Aidan O'Connell, Jordan Travis, which it never surprises me, but it kind of does surprise me at times when I see him up there. And then Anthony Richardson. But that feels like a little bit of a dangerous situation, just because even though he's going to start, if Emory Jones is available, it feels like maybe he could lose some snaps. Running back, your top owned plays right now are looking like Chase Brown, Pat Garwo, Evan Hull. So everyone that we've talked about pretty much, we're kind of chalky this week. And then at wide receiver, like I had mentioned, Raheem Jarrett, which I just don't agree with at all. I'm not gonna do it. I might regret it. Dotson and Bell. So I mean, everybody, it's kind of obvious, right? So all the plays that everyone's high on, it's kind of an obvious slate. So knowing that those guys in that group that we're high on, you got to find your leverage somewhere else. It might make sense to go find, Armstrong, like Jake just mentioned, or go, get my dude, Keaton Thompson, who is projecting under 15% right now. Or a Bo Melton. I mean, there's definitely some spots. I think there's plenty of viable QBs in my write-up. I had like 8 QBs that I think I felt relatively comfortable with. So knowing, what the chalk's going to be, you can definitely find plenty of leverage. So especially from Jarrett. All right. So PrizePicks. I start because to me, there was a couple that jumped out, but and you'd mentioned the Chase Brown one over 94 point, or you mentioned his rushing total in general. I do like the over there, especially if he gets that carry volume. But to me, the Dotson 97.5, a lot of the receivers they've put at like 105 or 110 or like David Bell, they took over 100. But Dotson, they give us a little bit of room, and I just don't know how he wouldn't get 120 plus against Michigan State, unless they just completely fall on their face, which I don't seeing. So Dotson over 97.5 receiving yards was one I was really high on. And then Evan Hull over 67.5 rushing yards. We know he's going to get a ton of volume, even if the game script is against him. So give him 80 rushing yards. I think you can hit that. If you wake up tomorrow and that's like 72 or something, you can still hit that. You can hit that up to like 74 and still feel okay. What are some that you've noticed?
So one that I had noticed has actually gone up since I noticed it. So I had Travion at, it was, I think 72 or 72.5. I just looked again and it's gone up to 81.5 since.
Oh, wow. That's a pretty big jump.
I still think he's going over that, but I'm a little bit more reticent to say, just smash that. Because apparently they agree with me that 72 was too low. So I'll move on to another one from that same game, and it's also gone up, but not substantively. They had Olave at 5 receptions, and they've upticked to 5.5. So I still think I'm taking over 5.5 for Olave. I think the rationale for that, JSN and Wilson have done more of the deep stuff, and Olave has done more of the underneath stuff. And I think the way that Michigan's going to be game planning is to take away the over the top, which is why I like Henderson as much as I do, but it also opens up those, 7-yard comebacks that Olave runs, and you only need a few of those before you're at like a 4-catch first quarter, right? So I think 5.5 is a pretty safe number for him there. And why don't you do another one, and then I'll give you my next best one.
All right. So I like to hit the overs. I'm a big over guy on football. Aidan O'Connell, I didn't want to mess around with any of his individual stuff, but I fantasy points, this is one I hit a lot in college basketball, just hit this fantasy points in general. But in college football, I usually do props, but his 17.5 fantasy point total seems pretty low. We got to assume he's going to throw at least 35 to 40 times again, get a couple touchdowns in there. If he clears that 300 mark, like he has been, I mean, he's pretty much coasting into 20 fantasy points at minimum. So 17.5 feels too low. So I am hitting the over there. And then it wouldn't be wouldn't be a show if we didn't talk about our guy Rashad. Over 92.5 rushing yards. He's going to bang out 100 plus against again this week, and no problem at all. So I like White at over 92.5.
Yeah, that was another one, and I guess because he wasn't on the main slate, I didn't mention that. But yeah, that one jumped out to me as well as like he might get over that one by 100 yards. So yeah, I like that one quite a bit. And then let's see, there was where now. Yeah, okay. It's kind of a cop out because I'll probably do this every week if given the opportunity. But the passing TDs for Stroud, just because I think Henderson has a big game doesn't mean I don't think that Stroud won't get his work too. And it's going to be either Henderson running in or Stroud throwing it. We don't have a lot of other options for touchdowns to happen for Ohio State, and I think over 2.5, so 3 or more passing touchdowns is very reasonable for Stroud. So a little bit wonky to have been on Henderson and now be taking a Stroud prop, but I'll take 3.5 or over 2.5 passing touchdowns all day for him.
And I have one more as well. Tennessee plays Vanderbilt. It's not on the slate. I was hoping it would be, but Cedric Tillman, I affectionately refer to him as Ceddy, 81.5 receiving yards. He's really kind of just, Hooker likes to throw to a couple different guys, but Tillman seems like his guy. So I feel like in this game, Hooker's going to get his rushing yards, but he'll throw like, a 50 or 60 yarder to Tillman. So if he gets that, and then he just has to get 20, 5 more yards on 6 other targets, I feel pretty good about him eclipsing 81.5 receiving yards. So it's not my most confident one, but I definitely feel like it's in play. If you guys want to mix and match a few, there's some good ones. All right. Earlier in the show, I had missed it, but one guy just wanted a couple of FanDuel takes. I didn't realize I don't expect you to have any of that. So I'm just going to kind of look at pricing. In my write-ups, I definitely, give a FanDuel core and mention stuff, but pricing wise, looking at it, Jordan Travis is $9K on FanDuel, and Phil the Jerkstore Jerkovich is 8.3. I think that's a really good place to start on FanDuel at quarterback instead of, going up and paying these 11.5 for Hartman, or, as much as I love Malik Cunningham, they have that Louisville game on there. I think that might be later on DraftKings at 10.8, or Armstrong at 10.7. I mean, those are tough prices to pay. Obviously they're warranted, but I think you can do a lot with Travis at 9 and Jerkovich at 8.3, and their touchdown equity obviously quite high for what they do, and they can run the ball. So I think a quarterback, I'd go there. And then, same type of thing on DK. Garwo, he's only 7.7 there. I certainly like him. And then at wide receiver, you can go and get yourself, Jordan Addison at 9.7, or, Keaton Thompson or Trey Turner, who's only 6.6, depending on the health situation of VTech. Like Jake had mentioned, Turner's healthy and good to go. 6.6 on FanDuel. That's like what, low 5s on DK. That's definitely in play. So I wish we had, some more FanDuel takes, but if we, as we go, if people want more FanDuel stuff, we'll start incorporating that in our shows going forward. And I think that's it. I got all the comments. I meant to check that earlier, but I get to talking and I don't stare at the screen. So, do you have any, before we get out of here, any oh wait, let's talk about core. I almost forgot. Let's get a core 3 going here.
So I think I'm going to go quarterback. I'm going to go with O'Connell. Running back, I'm going to go probably Hull, even though I'm going to be very heavy on Trevion as well, just because I want to have a core that allows you to also pay up at receiver. And then I'm going to go Dotson at wide receiver.
Yeah, and that's excellent. I'm gonna, the one I wrote up and I'm gonna stick with for now, even though I made it pretty clear in my write up that I will be playing Dotson too. But Aidan O'Connell, that passing volume's too good. And then Garwo, kind of going cheap there. But Hull, Brown, all those guys in play, and then for me it's David Bell, because if I'm playing Aidan, I don't need to have. I always say I'm not a big correlation guy, but then I feel like I'm always talking about it lately. But I do want to have Bell paired up with Aidan, because at the end of the day, even if he throws 4 touchdowns to guys not named David Bell, I know Bell's going to still have 15 plus targets in a pass heavy game. So I will go there. Couple of housekeeping things. We are doing still the gold package, which is all niche sports at FTN Daily. If you check the pricing tab, you can get 20% off my code DUB. And we had a 40% off Black Friday thing. I don't know if that's still going on, but that does give you, NHL, NASCAR when it's around, all college sports, esports, all that good stuff. So you get access to our premium Discords, cheat sheets, pick trackers, and of course our write-ups. So definitely check that out. We appreciate everybody who continues to support the show. This is not the end. We still, like I said, we have conference championships next week. There's some makeup games. Looks like there's a Navy game 2 weeks from now, and then bowl stuff. So we're gonna have bowl, shows about bowl games, and then we have some pretty cool ideas for write-ups for you. Jake, is there anything that you want to, any random stat or anything that you want to say before we head out of here?
No, I think we're all good. Try and leave yourself enough salary to get a Connor Blumwick lineup, and that'll be a ton of fun.
Oh yeah, for sure. Because he can be a guy at 4.5 who can do some serious damage and shoot 2 touchdowns. That's big time. So you'll have a good advantage over the field. So appreciate it. There's a lot of you who watch live this time. We thank you very much. Make sure you guys hit that like button for us, and definitely get over to the Discord tomorrow. It's going to be very important with news, happening. That Bowser news today was very important. We were reporting on that. People in the Discord are reporting it as well. Really, honestly, is the easiest way to not miss any crucial news. And it sounds like there's going to be a lot. So thanks again, Jake, for joining me as always. Thanks to everyone who watched. Good luck tomorrow. And let's fill up that Discord with green screens. See you guys.